There's a few guides and even interviews from stand-up comedians talking about how they got started. Even if they have a clever set that they spent weeks practicing and polishing, stage presence is another dimension to their act. Their delivery, charisma, relatability, and an ability to roll with the punches are a huge part of what clinches the act. What makes something funny isn't a fully teachable skill. Most comedians learn what works and what doesn't through a combination of throw spaghetti at the wall experiments, practice, feedback from friends or audiences alike, and general experience. Like any other kind of artist or performer, comedians have an approach or set unique to them. They may cover similar topics and themes to someone else, but their tone, delivery, and other hallmarks about their act are specific to them. It's fun when a cartoon plays with the idea of one of the characters going into or trying stand-up. The Hey Arnold episode, Helga's Show, follows Helga roasting the other students in her class as her comedy set during a weekly talent showcase. Helga's roasts are an interesting intersection between her harsh, rude front and her more insightful, detail-oriented creative side. She's a child prodigy when it comes to analyzing visual art or writing books full of lovesick poems. Unfortunately, Helga has little support at home and hides behind being more blunt and aggressive than she really is. She mixes her bullying tendencies with clever wordplay on stage. The goal is to entertain with a more playful elbow bump, rather than intimidate with a fist. While the episode's approach to exploring the fine line between a direct insult and a cheeky roast is shaky, it's still interesting to see what Helga's approach to stand-up looks like. There's a running gag in the Bob's Burgers episode, The Deepening, where Mort the Mortician tries his hand at stand-up comedy. He enjoys puns, and plays with the premise of poking fun at the more morbid parts of his profession. In general, Mort has a very easygoing attitude and approaches life with a grin and lame dad jokes. Mort wants to be liked and part of the crowd, but he can be awkward in a way that it's followed with too much silence after, a frown, and dropping things in a rough, brusque way. When Mort tries to smooth over awkwardness, he pushes the joke further. He continues to beat a dead horse. A smooth recovery after an awkward beat is an art in and of itself. Because Bob's Burgers is full of ridiculous characters that all revel in their own brand of awkwardness, it's more fun if Mort never learns how to properly segue after awkward moments. He's the understated complement to fellow diner regular Teddy's more manic, loud, and chaotic social faux pas. In the case of Joe Cuppa in OKKO, he's a formerly successful stand-up comedian. The minute he walks on stage at the plaza, he carries the confidence and presence of a true seasoned professional. The tune itself establishes this with the dramatic contrast between Joe and the amateur that went before him. The amateur comedian was a sweating, nervous wreck that had a loose idea for a set, but it was dubious how well thought out and prepared it really was. He presented as someone starting a comedy career on a whim, versus genuine interest. A more generous take is that the previous act was going into his very first onstage performance. He was at the bumbling start of a potential career, where Joe has hit a proverbial wall. It's one thing for a wannabe to try something off the wall at an open mic, where anyone and everyone can get on stage. It's somewhere between a failure and a splash of cold water realization for a professional like Joe performing to rows of empty chairs. Joe has a tried and true set that used to work. He was popular enough that he had shows recorded and syndicated on TV. He was a household name that gathered crowds and easily filled seats. Now, he's an echo of his former glory. Rad is familiar with him, but neither Enid or KO recognized him or even knew he existed. Considering that Rad knew him from reruns, his parents were probably fans when Joe was still a more known name. It's possible that Joe had a very particular niche in the world of comedy, too. Joe's act relies on cheesy copy puns that are varying degrees of clever to painfully forced. It's in the same vein as classic dad jokes. The jokes themselves are very simple and basic. Anyone can make these surface-level observations and cracks. What makes Joe's act stick is his full commitment to the act. He has an everyman, personable charisma to him, between his business casual shirt with rolled-up sleeves and frumpy tie, to his playful and slightly obnoxious banter. He's lame. He knows he's lame, and he owns this with the earnest energy that makes a suburban dad charming and likable. It's all about meeting his audience at their level in such a way that feels natural and affable. It's interesting that Rad is such a big Joe Cuppa fan. In general, Rad is very closed doors about his interests unless it's a hobby like fitness, sports, or dumb stunts that directly support and embellish his desired image of the stoic macho man. Rad's public persona is a try-hard dude bro, but stoic macho man is the goal. Usually, Rad gets overly defensive or even outright denies his interest if someone teases him about it, or falls under descriptions like soft, vulnerable, feminine. He's reluctant to push back against the status quo if the cool kids think something is lame. Enid is very blunt about how unimpressed she is by Joe and his jokes. Rad owns how much he loves Joe and his jokes. Joe's comedy is one of the few dorky interests Rad has that he wholeheartedly endorses and backs up. Maybe part of Joe's appeal for Rad is that Joe is open and realized in a way that Rad hopes to achieve for himself someday. Similarly to how a comedian's set reflects who they are and how they handle daily life, someone's interest in a comedian or artist reflects what they might aspire to be like, or even some of what their personal values are. Rad is characterized as someone that can be as lame and dorky as Joe. He just doesn't have the confidence to match what Joe brings to those parts of his character yet. The difference even carries over to the tone between the slapstick gags that play out with Rad or Joe respectively. When Joe gets thrown through the front shop window, or looks shell-shocked by the general chaos of a retail setting, it's followed by a moment of earnest sympathy and reflection for Joe. The episode ends with a series of absurdist and ridiculous cartoony slapstick directed at Rad. The convenient karma of the cartoon world matches how badly a character needs a win or a light comeuppance. When Rad has earnest moments that share the same thoughtful and self-aware gravity Joe has, the universe is kinder and carries a lighter touch. He's still a lightning rod for cartoon antics as one of the immediate comic reliefs, but the antics are appropriately sidelined for character moments. Overall, Joe's story focuses on a celebrity after their 15 minutes of fame are up, or even an older person that just retired from their job after 20 years. Audiences don't connect with Joe's act anymore. After his latest flop at the Plaza, Joe seriously considers giving up on comedy altogether, and thinks about the immediate need for some kind of change, or even a new direction. While exaggerated, Joe paints a depressing picture. Comedy put food on the table for him. Coffee puns paid his bills, kept a roof over his head, and sustained his livelihood as much as it served his self-expression in an artistic outlet. Performing at the Plaza's open mic was a last-ditch effort to revive his dead career. Otherwise, Joe is in such a desperate position that he sleeps in gas station bathrooms, abuses free samples, and tries to shoplift in shoddy disguises. When Joe tries his hand at retail, he gives a legitimate effort to adapt and fit in with the role so outside of his wheelhouse. He tries to refurbish coffee puns into his customer service. He doesn't know enough about the available inventory to give pointers on what helps heroes, but he can brighten people's days with a laugh and a smile. Outside of cartoon logic, it does take time to learn store inventory and to build up enough product knowledge to answer even generally asked questions. Customer service also requires the ability to approach someone with a carefully crafted persona that's polite, friendly, informative, and has business-friendly polish. It's a different enough arena from being an entertainer that, while acting skills can carry over, it's still a noticeably different skill. Joe tries to give customer service the same boisterous energy he brings to stage. When a retired person has to enter retail, or tries to break into a different industry after 20 years of something else entirely, there's going to be a significant adjustment period. With time, effort, and active learning, a person will figure out how to fill a role to the best of their abilities, or that the role just isn't a good fit for their particular skills, demeanor, or otherwise. In an ideal set of circumstances, people find work, co-workers, and culture that is both a good fit for them, and somewhere that grows and changes with them in an organic way. Unfortunately, most people are stuck in positions where very few things are a good fit, or it's the struggle of shoving a circle-shaped peg into a square-shaped hole long enough to pay bills. This ongoing challenge affects someone, whether it's a young adult just entering the working world, or an older adult trying to stay in the working world out of sheer necessity. Customer service is a shove a circle-shaped peg into a square-shaped hole for Joe. He understands the surface-level assignment, but isn't sure how to approach this task in a way that meets even the bare minimum. When he helps with the Shannon fight, He's given a challenge that requires an out-of-the-box solution, and creative thinking that better matches the on-your-feet challenge of stand-up. He's able to retool his coffee puns into something entirely new. Coffee-themed superpowers and attacks. This is exactly what Joe needed. Something that plays to his strengths, but updates and refreshes his comedy act in a very different way. This is that rare moment where a retired handyman brings his years of electrical or plumbing experience to patching holes or fixing little maintenance issues around a store. An older accountant helps her son-in-law with taxes and ends up starting her own one-on-one business that helps other people file their taxes. Too many people can become stagnant. Something works to the point they become comfortable and it becomes routine. It's an unexpected blow when they lose their job, when new problems come up that require new skills or solutions outside of their current skill set, or an event that catastrophically disrupts the status quo. After this blow, a person can feel like a failure, or that they're obsolete. They have done the same thing for so long, and gotten so used to doing this thing a certain way. It's hard to look at their situation from a different perspective. Or even if they're trying new approaches or actively taking advice, it still takes a while to find the new something that works. Another part of Joe's story is that he takes suggestions and puts himself out there despite being at his lowest because he has support from KO. Sometimes an older person needs a reminder that their age doesn't have to be, and shouldn't be, a barrier. Learning and growing are lifelong. More people than ever live into their mid to late 80s, or even to age 100. Some of the most inspirational people are fine artists that started learning how to paint in their late 50s, and the 70-year-old that went back to earn her bachelor's degree just because she wanted to. Joe is restricted by the idea that he's washed up. His comedy career ended, but there's still so many other things he can do and try. And lucky for Joe, he gets recruited for a movie and starts an exciting, glamorous new position as a movie star. Most people won't become famous or movie stars, but there's still value in older people finding a new direction in life. The humbler counterpart to Joe Cuppa the celebrity is Mr. Gar the business owner, an active example of a healthy, positive male role model. KO inspires both Joe and Mr. Gar in their unique journeys, that their continued efforts to grow and change are both for their benefit, and someone younger that may end up at a similar crossroads to what they do someday. Healthy moves towards self-improvement lead to results like Joe the movie star versus Joe the washed-up comedian. Life throws curveballs, but someone can meet those curveballs more readily when they believe in their own ability to continue learning.